The sun filtered softly through the hospital blinds, glinting off the silver wheelchair of a man who hadn't smiled in months. Beside him sat his only son. A quiet boy of 8 with wide, searching eyes, born into a world of silence. Born to a man who had everything except the sound of his child's laughter. The doctors had said it from the start. It's permanent. He'll never hear. Millions were spent on surgeries, private specialists, imported devices, all to hear one simple word, Dad. But the silence never broke. Until the day she arrived. The new nurse was young, barely in her 20s, with a calmness that seemed to melt the tension in every room she entered. She didn't look at the boy with pity. She smiled at him like he was whole. She began spending time with him, drawing shapes on his palm, teaching him colors through touch, and humming softly as she worked. The father watched from a distance. She wasn't like the others. No medical arrogance, no clinical detachment. Just warmth. One morning, while cleaning the boy's ears, the nurse frowned slightly. Something didn't feel right. She tilted his head under the hospital light, then called another nurse for a flashlight. When she looked closely, her heart skipped. There was something small and waxy, deep inside both ears. Something that shouldn't be there. She ran to the attending physician. But he waved her off. Hayes had countless tests, scans. You're wasting time. Or she hesitated, then made a decision. That evening, after everyone had left, she carefully prepared her tools. A tiny suction device and saline drops. She worked slowly, gently, whispering reassuringly to the boy. And then it happened. A small, hardened lump slid free from his ear. Then another. Years of neglected buildup. Something no one had thought to check. She cleaned both ears, her hands trembling. The boy blinked, confused. Then his head turned sharply at the sound of her breath. His eyes widened. He had heard something. Tears flooded her eyes. She clapped her hands softly. The boy flinched, startled, then smiled, a radiant, trembling smile that said everything words never could. The next morning, the nurse stood silently as the father entered the room. His son ran toward him, pointing, giggling, laughing. The father froze, his world spinning. "You can hear me," he whispered, voice breaking. The boy nodded. The nurse watched from the corner, tears streaming down her face. The father turned, trembling, unable to speak. For years he had hired the best money could buy. But it wasn't science or surgery that healed his son. It was a stranger's kindness, her attention, her belief that sometimes miracles come quietly, through simple care. The father walked toward her, eyes full of gratitude, but she shook her head. "Don't thank me," she said softly. "Just listen. He has a lot to say." And for the first time in his life, he did. The father stood there, unable to move. Tears running freely down his face as his son's laughter echoed across the room. A sound he thought he would never hear. For a man who had built empires, who could buy anything with a signature, this was the one thing money could never give him. He fell to his knees and held his son tight, trembling. The boy's small hands touched his cheeks, tracing the tears, as if trying to understand what joy felt like through touch. And then, in a voice soft and uncertain, came one word, "Dad." The room fell silent. The nurse covered her mouth, her heart pounding. The father looked up, eyes wide in disbelief. It wasn't perfect speech, but it was real. His son had spoken. Weeks passed. The father, once known for his pride, began spending his days beside his son's bed, reading, playing, and laughing. The young nurse continued to visit, helping with therapy, never asking for anything in return. One afternoon, the father asked her quietly, "Why did you go against everyone's orders? What made you believe there was still hope?" She smiled faintly. "Because I've seen too many people stop believing too soon," she said. "Sometimes healing isn't about medicine. It's about patience and love." The father looked at her. Really looked, and for the first time in his life, he understood. He had spent years chasing success, but this simple act of compassion had done what all his fortune couldn't. He later donated an entire wing to the hospital, not in his name, but under hers. The Hope and Humanity Ward. A place for children who needed not just treatment, but kindness. Months later, as she watched the boy run through the hospital garden, calling out to the birds he could finally hear, the nurse smiled through her tears. The father caught her gaze and nodded softly, a silent promise that he would carry forward the kindness she'd shown. Because sometimes, the smallest act of care can create the loudest miracle. One that echoes far beyond walls of pain and silence, reminding the world that true healing begins with the heart.